The moment Katherine Vaughn heard the gunshot crack through the still morning air of her ranch, she knew her peaceful days of solitude were about to end in ways she could never have imagined. She dropped the bucket of feed she had been carrying and ran toward the sound, her long skirts catching on the dried brush as she moved. The year was 1878, and life on her small ranch outside Oregon City in the Willamette Valley had been quiet for the past 2 years since her father passed. At 20 years old, Katherine had grown accustomed to the loneliness that came with running a cattle operation by herself, though most folks in town thought she was too young and foolish to manage it properly. She had proven them wrong time and again, but their whispers still followed her whenever she rode into town for supplies. The sight that greeted her when she rounded the barn made her heart skip. A man lay crumpled near her fence line, his horse standing nervously a few feet away. Blood soaked through his shirt at the shoulder, and his weathered face was pale beneath several days of stubble. He could not have been much older than 30, she guessed, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and strong features that spoke of a hard life lived outdoors. Katherine did not hesitate. She knelt beside him and pressed her hand against the wound, applying pressure the way her father had taught her. The man's eyes fluttered open, revealing startling green eyes that looked up at her with confusion and pain. "Easy now," she said softly. "You have been shot. I need to get you inside." "No," he managed to say through gritted teeth. "Too dangerous. They might still be following." "Who might be following?" Katherine asked, but the man had lost consciousness again. She glanced around the empty landscape, seeing nothing but the rolling hills covered in autumn grass. Whatever danger he spoke of was not immediately apparent, so she made the decision to move him. It took considerable effort to drag him to the house, and by the time she had him on her kitchen table, she was breathing hard and her arms ached. Katherine worked quickly, cutting away his shirt to expose the wound. The bullet had gone clean through, which was fortunate. She heated water and retrieved her medical supplies, the same ones her father had kept for emergencies. As she cleaned and dressed the wound, she studied the man more closely. His hands were calloused and strong, the hands of someone who worked for a living. He wore a gun belt with a well-maintained revolver, and his clothes, though dusty and bloodstained, were of decent quality. She had just finished bandaging him when his eyes opened again. This time they were clearer, more focused, and they locked onto her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough. "You should not have helped me. You might have put yourself in danger." "Well, I was not about to let a man bleed to death on my property," Katherine replied, wiping her hands on a cloth. "Who are you and who shot you?" The man tried to sit up but winced and fell back. "Name is Garrett Ellis. I am a cattle buyer, or I was trying to be. I was on my way to Oregon City when 3 men ambushed me about 5 miles back. They wanted my horse and the money I was carrying for a purchase. I managed to get away, but not before one of them got a shot off. Did they chase you?" "For a while, but I think I lost them in the hills." "Still, they might come looking." Garrett's eyes searched hers with concern. "You live here alone?" Katherine stiffened. "I do, and I manage just fine. This was my father's ranch. He died 2 years ago and left it to me." Something shifted in Garrett's expression, a mixture of respect and worry. "A young woman running a ranch alone out here, that takes courage. Or foolishness, depending on who you ask in town," Katherine said with a slight smile. "Most people think I am too young to know what I am doing. They are waiting for me to fail so they can buy the land cheap. Are they right?" Garrett asked, not unkindly. "Not even a little bit," Katherine said firmly. "I've kept this place running, maintained the herd, and turned a profit both years. I know every inch of this land, every water source, every place where the grass grows best." My father taught me everything he knew before he passed. Garrett smiled despite his pain. I believe you. You handled that wound better than some field surgeons I have seen. Katherine felt warmth rise in her cheeks at the compliment. You need to rest. That wound will heal, but you lost blood. I will make you some broth. Over the next 3 days, Katherine tended to Garrett while keeping watch for the men who had attacked him. She saw no sign of them, but she kept her father's rifle close just in case. During those days, she and Garrett talked more than she had talked to anyone in months. He told her about his work buying cattle for the bigger ranches and railroad companies, about his travels through Oregon and California, about the changing face of the West as more settlers arrived and the open ranges began to close. In turn, Katherine told him about her childhood on the ranch, about learning to ride before she could properly walk, about her mother who had died when she was young, and about her father who had been both parent and teacher to her. She spoke of her struggles after his death, the creditors who had come calling, the neighboring ranchers who had offered to buy her out for pennies on the dollar, and her determination to prove she could succeed on her own. You remind me of the old-timers, Garrett said on the 3rd evening as they sat by the fire. His color had returned, and he was able to sit up without too much discomfort. The ones who came out here with nothing and built something from scratch. That kind of grit is rare, especially in someone so young. Katherine felt a flicker of irritation. Everyone keeps talking about how young I am. I am 20 years old, Garrett. I have been working this ranch since I was a child. Age does not determine wisdom or capability. Garrett held up his hand in apology. You are right, and I meant no offense. It is just that most people your age are still figuring out who they are. You already know exactly who you are and what you want. That is remarkable. And what about you? Katherine asked, deflecting attention from herself. How old are you and how did you end up in this line of work? I am 28, Garrett replied. I grew up in Missouri, worked on my family's farm until the war came along. Afterward, things were never quite the same back home. I headed west like so many others, worked as a ranch hand, learned the cattle business and eventually started buying and selling. I have been doing this for about 6 years now. Do you ever want to settle down? Have your own place? Katherine asked. Garrett stared into the fire for a long moment. I used to think so, but after drifting for so long, I am not sure I would know how to stay in one place anymore. That sounds lonely, Katherine said softly. It is, Garrett admitted, but loneliness is better than failing at something important. Better than letting people down. Katherine heard the pain in his voice and sensed there was a story there, but she did not press. Instead, she said, sometimes we think we are not ready for something, but we are wrong. Sometimes we are more ready than we know. Garrett looked at her then, really looked at her, and Katherine felt something shift between them. It was subtle, like the first hint of spring in the air, but unmistakable. The next morning, Garrett was well enough to stand and move around carefully. Katherine was checking on her cattle when she heard horses approaching. Her heart jumped into her throat as she grabbed her rifle and hurried back toward the house. Garrett was already at the window, his gun drawn despite his injury. 3 rough-looking men rode into the yard, spreading out in a way that spoke of bad intentions. Katherine recognized the type. Drifters and troublemakers who preyed on anyone they thought vulnerable. One of them, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, called out. We are looking for a man who might have come this way. Riding a bay gelding, wounded. Seen anyone like that? Katherine stepped out onto the porch, rifle held loosely but ready. I have not seen anyone. This is private property and I would appreciate if you moved along. The scarred man grinned, showing yellowed teeth. A woman alone out here. That is not safe. Maybe we should stay and make sure you are protected. I can protect myself just fine, Katherine said, her voice steady despite her pounding heart. Now leave. The three men exchanged glances, and Katherine could see them calculating, wondering if a young woman alone would really shoot. She raised the rifle slightly, making her intentions clear. Before things could escalate further, Garrett stepped out onto the porch beside her, his gun drawn. His face was pale, but his hand was steady. "The lady asked you to leave. I suggest you do so." The scarred man's expression darkened as he recognized Garrett. "So you are here. You have got something that belongs to us." "I do not have anything that belongs to you," Garrett said calmly. "You tried to rob me and I got away. That is the end of it." "Not hardly," another of the men said, his hand moving toward his gun. The next few seconds happened in a blur. The man drew, and both Garrett and Katherine fired simultaneously. Katherine's shot took the man in the arm, spinning him around, while Garrett's shot went wide due to his weakened condition. The other two men drew their weapons, and Katherine worked the lever on her rifle with practiced ease, firing again and forcing them to scatter. "Get out of here now, or the next one goes center mass," Katherine shouted, and something in her voice must have convinced them she meant it. The scarred man grabbed his wounded companion, and all three rode off at a gallop, throwing curses over their shoulders. Katherine's hands were shaking as she lowered the rifle. Garrett steadied her with his good arm, pulling her close. "You did good. You probably saved both our lives." "I have never shot at a person before," Katherine whispered. "I know, but you did what you had to do to protect what is yours. That takes courage." Garrett looked down at her, and Katherine realized how close they were standing, how natural it felt to have his arm around her. She stepped back, suddenly self-conscious. "We should make sure they are really gone." They spent the rest of the day watching for any sign of the men returning, but the hills remained empty. That evening, as they sat together in the growing darkness, Garrett said, "I should leave tomorrow. Those men might come back with reinforcements, and I do not want to put you in more danger." "Where will you go?" Katherine asked, surprised by how much the thought of him leaving bothered her. "I was supposed to meet a rancher in Oregon City about buying some of his stock. If that deal is still available, I will head there. After that, I do not know. Another town, another deal." "That sounds like a hard way to live," Katherine said. "It is the only way I know anymore," Garrett replied. They sat in silence for a while, and Katherine wrestled with feelings she had not expected. In just a few days, Garrett had become more than just an injured stranger she had helped. He had become someone she looked forward to talking to, someone whose presence made the ranch feel less empty. She thought about what he had said about drifting, about not knowing how to stay in one place, and she recognized it for what it was: fear disguised as freedom. "Can I tell you something?" Katherine said finally. "When my father died, everyone told me to sell the ranch. They said I was too young, too inexperienced, too much of a woman to handle it. They made it sound like wisdom, like they were trying to protect me from failure. But the truth was, they just could not imagine someone like me succeeding. They were judging me based on what they thought I should be capable of, not on what I actually could do." She turned to look at Garrett. "I think you are doing the same thing to yourself. You are telling yourself you are not the settling type, that you would fail at putting down roots, but maybe you are wrong. Maybe you are more capable than you think." Garrett met her gaze, and she could see the conflict in his eyes. "Katherine, I have been drifting for so long. I do not know if I remember how to be anything else." "Then maybe it is time to learn," she said softly. The moment stretched between them, filled with possibility and fear. Then Garrett reached out and took her hand. His calloused fingers intertwined with hers, and Katherine felt a jolt of connection that went straight to her heart. "You are wise beyond your years," Garrett said. "Everyone says you are too young, but they are wrong. You see things clearly, without all the baggage and fear that weighs the rest of us down. I have plenty of fear, Katherine admitted, but I have learned not to let it stop me from trying. Garrett squeezed her hand. What are you suggesting, Katherine? I am suggesting that maybe you do not have to leave. Maybe you could stay, at least for a while. I could use help with the ranch and you need time to fully heal. We could see where things go. People would talk, Garrett said. A young woman and a man living on the same property. People already talk about me, Katherine said. Besides, you could stay in the barn loft. It would be proper enough. Garrett smiled. You have thought this through. I have, Katherine admitted. Ever since I realized I did not want you to leave. The confession hung in the air between them. Garrett lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. I do not want to leave either. I have not felt this at peace in years. Then stay, Katherine said. At least for a while, see if you can remember how to stop moving. All right, Garrett said. I will stay. The decision made, they sat together watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Katherine felt something settle inside her, a rightness she had not known she was missing. She had been lonely for so long, telling herself she was content with her solitary existence, but Garrett's presence had shown her what she had been missing. Connection, partnership, the beginning of something that might become love. The next few weeks transformed both of them. Garrett's shoulder healed steadily, and as it did, he began helping around the ranch. Katherine was initially protective of her operation, worried that he might try to take over or tell her she was doing things wrong, but Garrett surprised her. He asked questions, listened to her explanations, and offered suggestions rather than commands. He treated her as an equal, something none of the other men in her life had ever done. Together they repaired fences, moved cattle to better grazing, and prepared for winter. Garrett brought skills from his years of working different ranches, and Katherine contributed her intimate knowledge of the land and her herd. They made a good team, each complementing the other's strengths. In the evenings, they talked for hours. Garrett told her about the places he had seen, the people he had met, the wild beauty of the West that was slowly being tamed. Katherine shared her dreams for the ranch, her plans to expand the herd and maybe even buy the adjacent property if it ever came available. They debated about cattle breeds, laughed over shared meals, and slowly, carefully, fell in love. It happened in small moments. The brush of hands when passing tools, the way Garrett's face lit up when he saw her coming, the protective way Katherine fussed over his healing shoulder, the comfortable silences that needed no words. The day Katherine realized she had fallen completely in love with him was unremarkable in every way except one. They were working together to free a calf that had gotten tangled in some brush. The mother was distressed, and the calf was struggling. Katherine approached carefully, speaking in soothing tones while Garrett kept the mother calm. Together they freed the baby and watched as it scampered back to its mother. We make a good team, Garrett said, wiping sweat from his forehead. We do, Katherine agreed, and when she looked at him, she saw her whole future reflected in his eyes. Garrett must have seen something in her expression because he went very still. Katherine, he said softly. Yes. I need to tell you something. I think I am falling in love with you. No, that is not right. I think I am already in love with you. I think I have been since the day you shot at those men to protect us both. Katherine's heart soared. I love you too. I have been trying to find the courage to say it. Garrett closed the distance between them and cupped her face in his hands. You are the bravest person I know. You do not need courage for this. Then he kissed her, and Katherine felt like the whole world aligned. His lips were gentle but sure, and she kissed him back with all the emotion she had been holding inside. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. I want to stay, Garrett said. Not just for a while, for good, if you will have me. Yes, Katherine said without hesitation. Yes, I want you to stay. I do not have much to offer, Garrett warned. Some savings, a good horse, and my skills, but I want to build a life with you. I want to make this ranch into something amazing together. That is all I need, Katherine said. We will build it together. They held each other as the afternoon sun slanted across the hills, two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed. Katherine had proven that age did not determine wisdom, and Garrett had learned that settling down was not the same as giving up. Together, they were stronger than either could have been alone. That evening, they rode into Oregon City together. The town had grown since Katherine's father's time, with new buildings lining the main street and more people arriving weekly. Garrett wanted to make his intentions clear and proper, so they went to see Reverend Michaels, the Methodist minister who had known Katherine's family for years. The Reverend was a kind man in his 50s with gentle eyes and a warm smile. He listened as Garrett explained that he wanted to marry Katherine and asked for the Reverend's blessing to begin courting her formally. "Katherine," Reverend Michaels said, "you are a woman of legal age and property. You do not need my permission, but you have my blessing if this is what you want." "It is," Katherine said firmly. "Garrett is a good man and we love each other." "Some folks might say you are rushing things," the Reverend observed. "You have only known each other a few weeks." "Some folks also said I was too young to run a ranch," Katherine replied with a slight smile. "I have learned to trust my own judgment, Reverend. Garrett is the right man for me." The Reverend chuckled. "Your father would be proud of you, Katherine. You have his strength and your mother's wisdom. Very well, when would you like to be married?" "As soon as possible," Garrett said, looking at Katherine for confirmation. She nodded eagerly. They set the date for 2 weeks hence, giving them time to prepare and for Garrett to send word to his family in Missouri. As they left the church, Katherine felt lighter than she had in years. She was no longer alone, no longer fighting the world by herself. News of the engagement spread quickly through Oregon City. The reactions were mixed. Some people were happy for Katherine, glad to see her finding companionship after years of solitude. Others were skeptical, muttering about hasty decisions and warning that the marriage would not last. A few of the older ranchers who had hoped to acquire Katherine's land were openly disappointed. One person who surprised Katherine with her reaction was Martha Henderson, the owner of the general store. Martha was a widow in her 40s who had always been kind to Katherine. When Katherine and Garrett came in for supplies, Martha pulled Katherine aside. "I am happy for you, dear," Martha said warmly. "Do not listen to the gossips. I have seen the way that man looks at you, and it is genuine. Besides, anyone who doubts your judgment has not been paying attention these past 2 years. You have proved yourself time and again." "Thank you, Martha," Katherine said, touched by the support. "That means a great deal to me." "Do you have a dress for the wedding?" Martha asked. Katherine hesitated. Her mother's wedding dress was packed away, but she was not sure it would fit. "I have not thought that far ahead." "Come by tomorrow," Martha said with a conspiratorial smile. "I have something that might work." True to her word, Martha presented Katherine with a beautiful cream-colored dress the next day. It had belonged to Martha's daughter, who had moved to San Francisco and left several items behind. With a few alterations, it fit Katherine perfectly. The 2 weeks before the wedding passed in a blur of preparation. Garrett proved his commitment by riding to the county seat to officially declare his intention to homestead on Katherine's property as her husband. He also withdrew his savings and used part of it to buy several head of breeding cattle to expand the herd, showing that he was invested in their future together. Katherine found herself marveling at how naturally they worked together, how easily they navigated decisions and plans. Garrett never tried to overrule her or dismiss her opinions. Instead, he listened, considered, and contributed his own thoughts. They made decisions together as true partners. The night before the wedding, Katherine sat on her porch as the sun set, thinking about the strange path that had brought her to this moment. If Garrett had not been shot, if he had not stumbled onto her property, if she had not had the courage to help him, none of this would be happening. Sometimes fate worked in mysterious ways. Having second thoughts, Garrett's voice came from behind her. He had been staying strictly in the barn loft to maintain propriety, but he had come to say good night. Not even a little bit, Katherine said, smiling at him. I was just thinking about how lucky I am, how lucky we both are. Garrett sat beside her on the porch steps. I never thought I would feel this way about anyone. I thought I was meant to be alone, always moving, never settling. Then I met you and everything changed. You showed me that I was wrong about myself, about what I was capable of. We both were wrong about some things, Katherine said. People told me I was too young to know my own heart, too inexperienced to make good decisions. But I knew from the moment you kissed me that this was right. Age does not determine when you are ready for love. The heart knows its own timing. You are wise beyond measure, Garrett said, taking her hand. I cannot wait to spend the rest of my life with you. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge. Tomorrow they would marry, and their lives would officially intertwine. Katherine felt no fear, only joy and anticipation. The wedding took place in the small Methodist church with most of Oregon City in attendance. Katherine wore the altered dress and carried wildflowers that Garrett had picked that morning. Martha Henderson and her husband stood as witnesses, and Reverend Michaels performed the ceremony with warmth and sincerity. When Garrett slipped the simple gold band on Katherine's finger, his hands trembled slightly. I promise to love you, honor you, and stand by your side for all my days, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Katherine looked into his eyes and said, I promise to be your partner, your equal, and your love for as long as we both live. Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife, Reverend Michaels said with a broad smile. You may kiss your bride. Garrett drew Katherine close and kissed her tenderly while the small crowd applauded. When they broke apart, both had tears in their eyes, but they were tears of joy. The reception was held in the church hall, with food provided by the women of the congregation. It was simple but heartfelt, and Katherine was touched by how many people came to wish them well. Even some of the skeptics seemed won over by the obvious love between the newlyweds. As the afternoon wore on and the celebration continued, Katherine found herself dancing with her new husband to the fiddle music played by one of the local farmers. Garrett held her close, and she rested her head against his chest, hearing the steady beat of his heart. Happy? He asked softly. More than I ever thought possible, Katherine replied. They stayed at the reception until evening, then rode back to the ranch together as the sun set in brilliant oranges and purples. The ranch looked different to Katherine now. It was no longer just her solitary refuge, but the beginning of their shared life together. That night, as they lay together in the house that was now truly their home, Katherine thought about all the people who had doubted her. They had said she was too young, too inexperienced, too naive to know her own heart. But she had proven them wrong. She had found love, built a partnership, and created something beautiful from what had started as a chance encounter. What are you thinking about? Garrett asked, running his fingers through her hair. How wrong everyone was about me, Katherine said. How wrong you were about yourself. We proved them all wrong, did we not? Garrett said with a smile in his voice. We did, and we will keep proving them wrong for the rest of our lives. They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, two souls who had found their perfect match against all odds. The first year of marriage brought challenges and joys in equal measure. Winter came hard that year, with snow piling up and temperatures dropping below freezing for weeks at a time. Katherine and Garrett worked together to keep the cattle fed and safe, often spending long hours in bitter cold to ensure the herd survived. During those difficult months, their partnership deepened. They learned each other's rhythms, their strengths and weaknesses. Garrett discovered that Katherine had an almost uncanny ability to sense when something was wrong with an animal, often catching illness or injury before it became serious. Katherine learned that Garrett had a gift for strategy and planning, able to think several steps ahead and anticipate problems before they arose. They also learned to fight and make up. Their first serious argument came in January when Garrett suggested selling off some of the older cattle to reduce the feed costs through winter. Katherine initially resisted, feeling protective of every animal on the ranch. The discussion grew heated, with both of them raising their voices. But unlike Katherine's experience with other men who had tried to tell her how to run her ranch, Garrett did not dismiss her concerns or pull rank as the husband. Instead, he listened to her reasons, acknowledged her emotional connection to the cattle, and then explained his reasoning more fully. In the end, they reached a compromise, selling only a few head and supplementing the feed by purchasing hay from a neighbor. After the argument was resolved, they held each other close. "I am sorry I raised my voice," Garrett said. "You know this ranch better than anyone. I should trust your instincts more." "No, you were right about the practical aspects," Katherine admitted. "I let my feelings cloud my judgment. We need to make smart business decisions, not just emotional ones. That is why we are partners. We balance each other." That ability to fight fair and resolve conflicts with mutual respect became one of the foundations of their marriage. They learned to see disagreements not as battles to be won, but as opportunities to find better solutions together. Spring arrived with a burst of new life. The cattle that had survived the winter began calving, and Katherine and Garrett spent long days and nights helping with difficult births and ensuring the calves thrived. It was exhausting work, but there was something deeply satisfying about it, especially when they worked side by side. One evening in late April, after a particularly long day, they sat on the porch watching the sunset. Katherine leaned against Garrett's shoulder, feeling bone-tired but content. "We had a good calving season," Garrett observed. "If prices hold, we should be able to expand the operation like you wanted." "Like we wanted," Katherine corrected gently. "This is our dream now, not just mine." Garrett kissed the top of her head. "Our dream, I like the sound of that." "I have been thinking about something," Katherine said, a note of nervousness in her voice. "What is it?" "I am late. I mean my monthly courses. They should have come 2 weeks ago." Garrett went very still. "Do you think you might be with child?" "I think I might be," Katherine said, turning to look at him. "How do you feel about that?" A slow smile spread across Garrett's face. "I feel like the luckiest man alive. A beautiful wife, a thriving ranch, and now possibly a child. It is more than I ever dared to hope for." Katherine felt relief wash over her. She had not been sure how Garrett would react to the possibility of becoming a father so soon. "You are not worried about having another mouth to feed, about the responsibility?" "Of course I am a little worried," Garrett admitted, "but mostly I am excited." "You will be an amazing mother, Katherine, and I promise to be the best father I can be." Over the next few weeks, it became clear that Katherine was indeed pregnant. Martha Henderson confirmed it, having helped deliver most of the babies in Oregon City over the past decade. The news spread quickly through town, and Katherine was amused by how it seemed to finally convince the last skeptics that her marriage was legitimate and lasting. Now they believe we are really married, she said to Garrett with a laugh. A baby makes it real in a way the ceremony did not, apparently. Let them think what they want, Garrett said, placing his hand gently on her still flat belly. We know the truth of what we have. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer. Katherine continued working on the ranch, though Garrett became increasingly protective, insisting she avoid the more dangerous tasks. They compromised as they always did, with Katherine agreeing to be more careful while maintaining her involvement in the daily operations. As her belly grew, Katherine felt a deep sense of completeness. She had her land, her love, and soon would have a child. All the things people had said she was too young for, too inexperienced for, had come to her naturally and successfully. She had trusted her own wisdom despite what others said, and it had led her to this beautiful life. In late October, Katherine gave birth to a healthy baby boy during a long night with Martha Henderson attending. Garrett paced outside the bedroom, and when Martha finally called him in to meet his son, his hands shook as he held the tiny bundle. "We have a son," he said in wonder, tears streaming down his face. "Katherine, we have a son." They named him James after Katherine's father. The baby had Garrett's dark hair and what looked like it might become Katherine's blue eyes. He was perfect in every way, and both parents fell instantly and completely in love. The first few months of parenthood were challenging. James was colicky and cried often, especially in the evenings. Katherine and Garrett took turns walking him, soothing him, and surviving on very little sleep. But through it all, their partnership held strong. When Katherine was exhausted, Garrett took over. When Garrett was frustrated, Katherine remained calm. They supported each other through the difficult moments and celebrated together when James finally smiled, then laughed, then began to grow into his own little personality. By the time James was 6 months old, the ranch had grown significantly. Garrett had used his connections in the cattle business to negotiate better prices for their stock, and Katherine's careful breeding program was producing healthier, hardier animals. They hired a young man named Peter to help with the daily work, giving them more time to focus on the business side of ranching and on raising their son. One evening in early spring, as they watched James crawl around on a blanket in the grass, Garrett said, "I was thinking about the land adjacent to ours. I heard old Mr. Thompson might be willing to sell." Katherine's eyes lit up. "Really? I have wanted that land for years. The water rights alone would be invaluable. We have the money saved if we are careful. What do you think?" "I think we should make him an offer," Katherine said decisively. They negotiated for several weeks, but eventually purchased the Thompson property, nearly doubling the size of their ranch. It required taking on some debt, which made both of them nervous, but they were confident in their ability to make it work. As they stood on the newly acquired land, looking out over the expanded territory that was now theirs, Katherine felt a profound sense of accomplishment. "Remember when you first arrived here, wounded and half dead, and I was just a lonely rancher everyone thought was too young to know anything?" Garrett laughed and pulled her close. "I remember thinking you were too young for all this responsibility. I was so wrong. You were exactly the right age, with exactly the right wisdom and strength. You taught me that." "We taught each other," Katherine said. "You showed me that I did not have to be alone, that accepting help and partnership did not make me weak. I showed you that you were capable of staying, of putting down roots, of building something lasting." "We make a good team," Garrett said, echoing the words he had spoken the day they freed the calf so long ago. "The best team," Katherine agreed. They stood together watching the sun set over their land, their son playing at their feet, their future stretching bright before them. Against all odds and all doubts, they had built something beautiful together, The years that followed brought both triumphs and trials. When James was 3 years old, Katherine gave birth to twin girls, Alina and Grace. The births were difficult, and for a while the doctor feared they might lose Katherine. But she fought through with her characteristic strength, and both babies were born healthy and squalling. Garrett was overwhelmed with love and terror in equal measure, now responsible for 3 young children and a wife who meant everything to him. But Katherine recovered quickly, and soon the house was filled with the chaos and joy of a young family. The ranch continued to prosper. The expansion onto the Thompson land proved to be a wise decision, and within a few years, they had paid off the debt and were able to invest in improvements. They built a larger barn, improved the house with an addition for the growing children, and purchased a small herd of horses that Garrett began breeding and training for sale. James grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved following his father around the ranch, learning everything he could about cattle and horses and land management. The twins were wild and fearless, constantly getting into mischief and keeping their parents on their toes. Alina had Katherine's determination and directness, while Grace had Garrett's easy charm and quick wit. When James was 10, a drought hit the Willamette Valley hard. For 2 years, the rains failed to come in their usual abundance, and the grass withered. Many smaller ranchers went under, unable to sustain their herds through the difficult times. Katherine and Garrett faced the hardest period since their marriage began. They made difficult decisions, selling off cattle to reduce the strain on the land, rotating pastures more aggressively, and hauling water to supplement the dwindling natural sources. There were nights when Katherine lay awake worrying about money, about the children's future, about losing everything they had built. But Garrett would hold her and remind her of how far they had come, of all the challenges they had already overcome together. "We did not come this far to fail now," he would say. "We are stronger than this drought. We will survive it." And they did. The 3rd year brought rain again, and the land recovered. Their careful management during the drought meant they had land and cattle left to rebuild, while many of their neighbors had lost everything. It was a hollow victory in some ways, seeing friends and neighbors fail, but it also proved the wisdom of their partnership and planning. As the ranch recovered and then thrived again, Katherine and Garrett found themselves becoming leaders in the community. Other ranchers came to them for advice. Young couples starting out asked them about managing land and livestock. Even those who had once doubted Katherine's ability to run a ranch now respected both her expertise and her judgment. One afternoon, a young woman named Sarah came to the ranch seeking advice. She was 19 and had just inherited her uncle's small spread after his death. The local men were pressuring her to sell, telling her she was too young and inexperienced to manage it alone. Katherine listened to Sarah's story with a knowing smile. When the young woman finished, Katherine said, "Do you want to keep the ranch?" "More than anything," Sarah replied. "But maybe they are right. Maybe I am too young." "Let me tell you something," Katherine said, leaning forward. "I was 20 years old when my father died and left me this place. Everyone said I was too young, too inexperienced, too naive. They were wrong. Age does not determine wisdom or capability. Your heart and your determination do." She gestured to the thriving ranch around them, to the children playing in the yard, to Garrett working with Peter in the corral. "I built all of this by trusting myself and refusing to let others define what I was capable of. If you want that ranch, you keep it. Work hard, learn everything you can, and do not let anyone convince you that you are not capable." Sarah left with tears in her eyes and renewed determination. 6 months later, she returned to thank Katherine, her ranch showing signs of her hard work and care. "You were right," she said. "I just needed to trust myself." "We all do," Katherine replied warmly. As Katherine entered her 30s and then her late 30s, she watched her children grow into impressive young people. James, at 15, was already a skilled horseman and cattleman, able to manage large portions of the ranch operation himself. The twins, at 12, were learning the business side from both their parents, showing an aptitude for numbers and negotiation that delighted Garrett. One evening, as Katherine and Garrett sat on their porch watching the sun set, something they had done countless times over the years, Garrett said, "Do you remember the day we met, when I stumbled onto your property half dead from a gunshot?" "Of course I remember," Katherine said with a smile. "It was the best day of my life, though I did not know it yet." "I thought you were too young for all this," Garrett said, gesturing to the ranch. "I was wrong about so many things back then. Wrong about you, wrong about myself, wrong about what I was capable of." "We were both learning," Katherine said generously. "No," Garrett said firmly. "You already knew who you were and what you wanted. I was the one who had to learn. You taught me that age is not what matters. Wisdom, courage, love, those are what matter. And you had all of those in abundance, even at 20. Katherine leaned her head on his shoulder. "We taught each other. That is what love is, I think, learning and growing together." "I love you more today than the day we married," Garrett said. "And I loved you so much then I thought my heart would burst." "I love you more too," Katherine replied. "Every day a little bit more." They sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, watching their children play in the last light of day. Around them, the ranch hummed with life and prosperity. The cattle were fat and healthy, the grass was green, the buildings were well maintained, and the future looked bright. When James turned 18, he asked his parents if he could begin courting Mary Sullivan, the daughter of a neighboring rancher. The Sullivans were good people, and Mary was a sensible, hard-working young woman who clearly loved James for who he was. "You are both young," Katherine said carefully, "but that does not mean you do not know your own hearts." "You were younger than me when you married Father," James pointed out. "I was," Katherine acknowledged, "and everyone said I was too young, but I knew what I wanted and I was right. If you feel the same certainty about Mary, then you have my blessing." James and Mary courted for a year before marrying in a ceremony that reminded Katherine so much of her own wedding. Watching her son embark on his own journey of love and partnership, she felt a deep sense of continuity, of legacy. The years continued to pass, bringing more changes and more joy. The twins both married in their early 20s, Alina to a lawyer from Oregon City, and Grace to a young rancher starting his own operation. Both daughters remained close to their parents, visiting often and raising their own children with the values Katherine and Garrett had instilled in them. Katherine and Garrett became grandparents many times over, and the ranch that had once been worked by a lonely young woman and a drifting cowboy now employed several families and spread across thousands of acres. It had become one of the most successful operations in the Willamette Valley, known for quality cattle and horses, ethical business practices, and fair treatment of workers. On their 30th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Children and grandchildren filled the house and yard with noise and laughter. James and his wife Sarah, yes, he had married the young woman Katherine had once advised, managed most of the daily operations now, giving Katherine and Garrett more time to simply enjoy the fruits of their labor. As Katherine stood on her porch watching 3 generations of her family celebrate, Garrett came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. His hair was gray now, and his face was weathered by years of sun and wind, but his green eyes still sparkled with the same love she had first seen all those years ago. 30 years, he said softly. It went by so fast. And so slow, Katherine said. I feel like I have lived a dozen lifetimes with you. Every day an adventure, every challenge overcome together. You ever regret it, tying yourself to a wounded drifter who stumbled onto your property? Katherine turned in his arms and looked up at him. Her own face showed the passage of time, lines around her eyes and threads of silver in her dark hair, but her gaze was as clear and determined as ever. Not for one single moment. You were the best thing that ever happened to me. You were the one who saved me, Garrett said. In every way a person can be saved. You taught me that I was wrong about myself, that I was capable of more than I ever dreamed. We saved each other, Katherine corrected. That is what love does. They kissed as the sun set behind them, surrounded by the family they had created and the life they had built together. Everyone stopped what they were doing to watch the couple who had started it all, still clearly in love after 3 decades. Tell us how you met again, one of the grandchildren called out. Tell us about the gunfight and the bad men and how Grandma saved Grandpa's life. Katherine and Garrett laughed and moved to the center of the family gathering. They told the story they had told many times before, but it never got old. The tale of how a lonely rancher and a wounded cowboy had found each other against all odds, had overcome doubts and dangers, and had built something beautiful together. The important part, Katherine said as she finished the story, is that people told us we were wrong. They said I was too young to know what I was doing, that Garrett was not the settling type, that our marriage would not last. But we proved them wrong because we believed in each other and in ourselves. Never let anyone else define what you are capable of, Garrett added. Trust your own wisdom, your own heart. Age and experience matter less than courage and love. The grandchildren listened with rapt attention, and Katherine knew that the lesson was sinking in. She and Garrett had not just built a successful ranch. They had created a legacy of belief in oneself, of partnership and mutual respect, of love that grew stronger with time rather than fading. As the celebration continued into the evening, Katherine found a quiet moment alone with Martha Henderson, who at 75 was still sharp and active, though she had passed the general store to her son. You did good, Katherine, Martha said warmly. I remember when you were that scared young woman who had just lost her father, trying to figure out how to survive alone. Look at what you built. I had help, Katherine said. From you, from Garrett, from so many people. You had help because you were wise enough to accept it while still trusting your own judgment, Martha corrected. That is a rare quality at any age, but especially at 20. You knew when to listen and when to follow your own path. I had to learn to trust myself, Katherine said. Everyone was so quick to tell me I was too young, too inexperienced. There were times I almost believed them. But you did not, and that made all the difference. As the evening wore on and the family gradually departed, Katherine and Garrett were left alone once again on their porch. It was their favorite place, the spot where they had shared so many conversations over the years, where they had made plans and dreamed dreams and simply enjoyed each other's company. What are you thinking about? Garrett asked, as he had asked countless times before. I am thinking about how perfect this life has been, Katherine said. How grateful I am for every moment of it. Even the hard times, especially the hard times, Katherine said. They taught us what we were made of. They proved how strong we could be together. Garrett squeezed her hand. I never imagined I could be this happy, this content. I thought I was meant to drift forever, never belonging anywhere. You showed me I was wrong. And you showed me that I did not have to face everything alone, Katherine replied. That accepting love and partnership was not weakness but strength. They sat together as the stars emerged, the same stars they had watched on their first night together, on their wedding night, and on countless nights since. The ranch was quiet now, settled for the evening, but it would come alive again tomorrow with work and purpose. "You think we made a difference?" Garrett asked softly. "Beyond our own family, I mean. Do you think we changed anything?" Katherine thought about Sarah, who had gone on to run a successful ranch and had inspired other young women to trust themselves. She thought about their children and grandchildren, growing up with the understanding that age and gender did not limit what a person could accomplish. She thought about the workers they had employed over the years, always treated fairly and with respect, who had gone on to start their own operations using what they had learned. "Yes," she said firmly, "I think we made a difference. Maybe not in some grand, obvious way, but in the lives we touched, in the examples we set. We showed people that love and partnership can overcome any obstacle, that wisdom is not just about age but about courage and heart." "Then it was all worth it," Garrett said. "It was more than worth it," Katherine replied. "It was everything." As they prepared for bed that night, moving through the rhythms they had established over 30 years of marriage, Katherine reflected on the journey that had brought them here. She thought about that frightened young woman who had heard a gunshot and run toward danger, not knowing she was running toward her destiny. She thought about the wounded cowboy who had stumbled onto her property thinking he was not meant for love or home or family. They had both been wrong about so many things, but they had been right about each other, and that had made all the difference. The years continued to roll by peacefully. Katherine and Garrett grew old together, watching their family expand and their legacy grow. The ranch remained prosperous, passing primarily into James's capable hands, but still benefiting from the wisdom and experience of its founders. When Katherine was 55, Garrett fell ill with pneumonia during a particularly harsh winter. For weeks, Katherine nursed him with the same dedication she had shown that first time so many years ago when he had arrived wounded on her property. She barely slept, constantly monitoring him, forcing him to drink and eat, refusing to let him give up. "You saved me once before," she told him during a particularly bad night. "I am not losing you now. We have more life to live together." And somehow, whether through sheer force of will or simple luck, Garrett recovered. When he was finally strong enough to sit on the porch again, wrapped in blankets against the cold, he said, "You saved my life twice now. 3 times if you count saving you from a lifetime of loneliness and drifting," Katherine said with a smile. "3 times then," Garrett agreed. "How will I ever repay you? You already have," Katherine said simply. "Every day we have had together has been payment enough." They lived to see their grandchildren grow and marry and have children of their own. The ranch continued to thrive across generations, a testament to what could be built with love, wisdom, and partnership. Katherine and Garrett became legends in the Willamette Valley, the couple who had proven everyone wrong, who had built an empire from nothing but determination and love. On a warm summer evening when Katherine was 68 and Garrett was 76, they sat on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. The sun was setting in brilliant colors, painting the sky in oranges and purples and reds. Around them, the ranch was peaceful and prosperous, filled with the activity of a new generation taking over. "You remember what you said to me once?" Garrett asked suddenly. "About how I was wrong about myself, about being capable of settling down." "I remember," Katherine said. "You were right, about everything. I was capable of so much more than I believed. I just needed someone to show me." "You showed yourself," Katherine said. "I just gave you the space to discover it." "We made a good life together," Garrett said, his voice full of emotion. "The best life," Katherine agreed. That night, Garrett passed away peacefully in his sleep, Katherine's hand in his. She held him as his breathing slowed and then stopped, and though her heart broke, she also felt a deep sense of gratitude. They had been given nearly 50 years together, 50 years of love and partnership and shared dreams. How many people could say the same? Katherine lived another 8 years, remaining active in the ranch management and watching her great-grandchildren grow. She never remarried, always saying that she had found her soulmate and one lifetime together was enough, though she missed him every day. When Katherine finally passed away peacefully at the age of 76, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, her last words were about Garrett and the life they had built together. "We proved them wrong," she whispered. "All of them. We were exactly who we needed to be." The ranch continued for many generations after, always carrying the legacy of Katherine and Garrett Ellis. Their story was told and retold, a testament to the power of love, of believing in oneself, of partnership and mutual respect. The young woman everyone said was too young had built an empire. The drifting cowboy everyone said would never settle had found home. Together, they had created something that lasted far beyond their own lives. In the family Bible, passed down through the generations, an inscription remained in Katherine's careful handwriting. "Never let others define your worth or your wisdom. Age is just a number. Love, courage, and determination are what matter. Trust yourself, trust your heart, and build something beautiful." And that was exactly what they had done. Against all odds, despite all doubts, Katherine and Garrett had proven that wisdom is not about age, that love knows no timeline, and that two people who believe in each other can overcome anything. Their love story became legend, passed down through generations, a reminder that sometimes the best things in life come when we trust ourselves enough to prove everyone else wrong. The ranch stood for over 100 years, eventually becoming a historic landmark. Tourists would come to see where the legendary Katherine Vaughn Ellis had run her operation, where she and Garrett had built their life together. The house was preserved, the porch where they had spent so many evenings still intact. And visitors would hear the story of how a lonely rancher and a wounded cowboy had found each other and built something that lasted long after they were gone. It was a story of love, certainly, but also of wisdom overcoming doubt, of courage triumphing over fear, of partnership creating something greater than either person could have achieved alone. It was the story of two people who had been told they were not ready, not capable, not right for each other, and who had proven through a lifetime of devotion that they were perfect exactly as they were. And in the end, that was Katherine and Garrett's greatest legacy, not the land or the cattle or the prosperity, but the proof that believing in yourself and in love can create miracles that last for generations.